hour. And, we're going to be talking for about an hour, and it goes ever so quickly. So we should, I think, just kind of get straight into it now. And so we've got an agenda for today. I've just done the welcome and introduction. We're then going to be looking at the kind of challenge and the opportunity of this piece of work. We're going to then look a bit about our processes. And then we're going to be looking at kind of what was the experience of being a part of this work from two of the participants. And we've left lots and lots of time at the end for kind of questions and discussion from yourselves. So as you're listening, as you're thinking, as thoughts are coming to you, chuck them into the chat so that it will inform the kind of the decent amount of time that we've left at the end to hear from you. I'm joined today by Radhika Byron from Impact on Urban Health, who is the funder of this project. Candice James, who's a community worker at BEM in Brixton, and Adrian Jones, who's also one of the leaders that was involved in this piece of work. Before we start, though, I'd just like to bring Radhika in. And Radhika, I'm wondering, Candice has come up on my screen for some reason when I've wanted to bring Radhika in, but when
I'm here.
she is here. How are you doing, Radhika?
I'm good.
Okay, you're good. Okay, Radhika, I'm just wondering, funding and power. I've kind of heard lots of people, and there's been lots of kind of debates within the field recently on the kind of idea of funding and power. What's the problem with funding and power? How are we seeing the problem with funding and power? What's going on?
I suppose so. As you know, so I work at Impact on Urban Health. We're a funder based in South London. And like many other funders and others, we've been thinking about this issue about power. And I guess the framing of it that I have is that all of us in this conversation and far beyond are interested in changing the world. The world is unjust, it's unequal, it's very poor for lots of people, and we are all actors in the social sector. We're all actors in trying to do something about that. That's what motivates us. That's why we're here. But the way that that change making is currently set up, there's a group of people who are doing that very close to the communities that they're working with, very close to the people experiencing that inequality. And those people have less power than the other people. There's another group of people who are a bit further away from it, who get to allocate the resource. And the way that's, we're all here trying to make it better, but one group of people have a lot more power than the other. And is that the right way round? The questions we're asking is it appropriate in 2024 that one group of people hold all the decision making or the levers, and the group of people who are closest to it feel far away from those levers? That's the question. And the power of that is one of the things that many of us in this conversation, I know, are actively engaged in trying to reposition. And for us, this project was part of our exploration into how to do that.
And so this project, framed as a participatory, I can never say that word, framed as a participatory grant-making project, is much more about is much more than getting groups of people together to make decisions about who should get grants, but it's an attempt to actually reframe how that works systemically so that the people closer to the ground are part of the system that is making a decision, not just about which events should be funded, but about what elements of the system they think need best to be tackled.
Yeah, that's right. Absolutely.
Thanks very much. And so there were three partners in this piece of work. There was Impact on Urban Health yourselves, There was us from Ubele Initiative. Sorry, I'm not sure if I introduced myself, but I'm Michael Hamilton. I'm one of the directors of the Ubele Initiative and Reos Partners. And Reos are a kind of international social enterprise that uses these processes as a matter of course. And Yannick, who was kind of central in this piece of work and one of the facilitators for this piece of work. He was supposed to be here this morning, but unfortunately he's not well. And so everybody in the audience and everybody on the screen just wave to Yannick because I'm sure he's watching. And we wish you well. So let's go on then, Radhika, to tell us a bit about the process.
So essentially, what this was we brought together these 15 different organizations, 15 to 20 local organizations, into us in were multi-day workshops. So, you know, it did require an investment of there we have it. Next, and moving on, yeah, we've met the people. And the aim of it was really to think, so essentially Impact and Urban Health wanted to do participation, obviously in terms of participatory grant making. Of course, we're a grant maker, we want to bring communities into how we do that, but we were thinking, what could we bring communities in at the point at which we are thinking about strategy? So not just, here are some applications, how would you like to, that's not how we work anyway. We don't have applications, we work in a sort of programmatic way. So we wanted to bring in communities to think about some of the systemic that we're looking at. And so we selected safety as it's not, we're a health foundation. Health safety is not something we currently work on, but obviously underpins so much of people's health in an urban environment. So we chose safety as a big bucket, as a big theme, and we invited local partners, people that we know well, who we know really understand the communities that we're working in. So we brought in these 15 organizations, and these 15 or 20 organizations who are experts because every day in their jobs, they are working with people who are experiencing lack of safety. That every day in their jobs, they are working to make Lambeth and Southwark, the part of South London we work in, safer. So, and also they've been doing it for a long time. They live in these communities, you know, like the level of insight is clearly insight of their lived experience, but also because their professional experience. So, you know, like just such extraordinary expertise, brought those in, and we wanted to think about safety as a systemic issue. What are the things? How would you intervene in the system to make communities in Lambeth and Southwark safer, communities in our place safer, and particularly Black and minoritized communities? Because in our part of South London, those are the groups that experience the highest levels of health inequalities, health inequity. So we wanted to think about safety, and we wanted them to be able to spend money, because we're a funder. This is all about resource. So we the objective of this process was to think about safety, to understand to explore the systems that contribute to lack of safety in our communities, and then to make some interventions in that space with a resource, which is the PGM element. And for us, I mean, this is really what I've just said, you know, that we, of course, recognize that the people who live and work and are in our communities are very well placed to making these decisions, and they are the experts, and we need to bring them into this decision-making process. We also wanted to think about the whole process. So, you know, that thing about when we were starting to think about participatory grant making, you know, a lot of the conversation is about making the decision once the applications are in, once proposals have already been developed. Because we don't work in quite that way, we work programmatically, we explore, we work, we intervene in systems, and we develop programs and activities with partners. That's our model. For us, that grant-making decision at the end bit, just sitting around and looking at the applications, doesn't work. But also we had questions about, is that the most effective way to use the wisdom that we have in these communities? And then, as I say, to take a systems lens to it. So what are the many factors that contribute to lack of safety? And to do this whole thing, recognizing that the way that the power dynamic has been set up in the system that I'm part of, that we're all part of, this is the kind of water we're all swimming in. How can we ask some deep questions about that power dynamic? How can we set up this process in a way that shifts that, and be really conscious about how hard it is to shift power, and that we constantly come back to it and think about the structures, the processes, the conversations, the way we do it in a way that is conscious about that power dynamic.
Mm-hmm.
So this, as I say, the people that came in are people who lead organizations in the communities that we in Lambeth and Southwark, which are two boroughs, metropolitan districts in South London. And these are people who've been doing it for a long time, who have been there, who know their communities really well, who saw us through COVID and before COVID and after COVID, and you know, that whole cycle. So really just leaning into that expertise and wisdom. And as the funders, so I was one of the from Impact on Urban Health, there were 4 of us that were working on this project. I'm the one here today, but there were 3 other colleagues who were also part of this process. And all of us come from a minoritized background. So this project specifically sought to center Black experience and minoritized experience. And in London, in our area, health inequality has a very clear racial dimension, and Black communities are really experiencing high levels of inequality. We know that from the numbers. So we wanted to center that experience. So everybody in the room, in the conversation, had experience of minoritization, including the facilitators, so Ubele and Reos. Well, you know, so it did change the conversation, and there was a kind of, we didn't talk about racism. You know, the conversation is different when you're in those spaces, because everybody comes to it with a certain level of understanding. And I think one of the things we realized, I mean, Michael, I'm going to let you talk about the decision to bring the conversation that you and Yannick had about whether the funders should be in the conversation at all or not.
Shall I do that now then?
Yeah.
Yeah. So there was some thoughts right at the beginning of the project between Yannick and I. Yannick's sick. Hello, Yannick. I'm sorry you're not here. But Yannick and I had a conversation really early on in the project, when we realized the possibility that Radhika and other funders actually might be in the room, and what we felt about that, and if we thought we could make this work with them in the room, and would that do something to the power dynamic immediately, and have impact on the nature of the conversation that people would have, that people would start behaving because the funder was present, was our worry, or behaving in a particular way because the funder was present was our worry. But I think that we're going to talk more about the kind of relational elements of this work in a little while. But I think that what we did with that was decided that it would be good if they were in the room, because they were part of this system that we were trying to change, and it would be difficult to even see their perspective on that system if they were not there. But what we decided to do was just be completely honest and open about that really early on, and to have those discussions. And that they were in that, and that they came into the room in the process and joined in the process with everybody else and did what everybody else did. And so the kind of relational change, I think, between the funder and the participants actually was part of the change of the project. Was that one of the things that systemically the project changed was the relationship between impact on urban health and the people that it funds. I'm going to shut up now. And do I carry on?
You do.
I do. Okay. I think the other thing that we really kind of experienced, and that little conversation there about should we have the funder in the room or not have the funder in the room, and how should we work with that, spoke to what I call the messiness of the project. And I don't mean that the project was a mess. I mean that there were lots of things in the work that needed to be negotiated throughout the work, because difficult questions demand, in a way, difficult conversations and difficult responses. And that part of the project and part of the work that we were doing was living with the difficulty and living with the contradictions that we have to live with all the time, really, when we're doing work on the ground. And that an exposure of that messiness and an exposure of that difficult we were able to do because I think we'd done the relational work that led up to it. So the fact that we'd kind of grown some trust. Do you want to go on to the next slide? The fact that we'd grown some trust, that we learned to talk to each other, that we knew what we were carrying, when we were talking to each other, meant that we could lean into the messiness and deal with it as it emerged in the work. I don't think that we tried to flatten it at any time, but what we tried to do was to lean into it. But it was a lot of work. You know, it really was a lot of work. And it was a lot of work for the people called the participants in the process. And it was really important, I think, to take that work seriously and to take those people seriously. And so we had to enable them to be there. We had to make it possible for them to be in the room. And we had to equalize the relationship by recognizing their expertise. And that was kind of financial recognition of their expertise. And that was financially buying space from their organization, in order that they could be there, and in order that they could be there on a kind of equal footing to everybody else. Yeah, they were being paid to do a piece of work. And that the piece of work that they were being paid to do was to invest in making some systemic change to the way that funding had been happening up until now. Money was really difficult. Money's always really difficult to talk about. And I always tell a story about money, which is that my only relationship with money growing up was not having enough money. And so my relationship with money was arguments about bills being paid, or things being switched off, or not being able to go on school trips, or social services paying for you to go on school trips. And And that if that's our kind of historic, my kind of traumatic relationship with money, when somebody says, even now, as a director of Ubele, when I have to go into, Yvonne will tell you, the people that know Yvonne in the room, Yvonne will tell you Michael's just rubbish at talking about money, because he just gets tongue-tied and he gets all twisted up. And that I think as Black people, as minoritized people, that in the sector, our relationship with money sometimes to me feels a bit, I don't know what the English word would be, maybe somebody can, but a bit kind of beggy, that we're kind of begging people some, we're asking somebody for things that don't really belong to us, that belong to somebody else, and we're asking them for something in order to use it to do the thing that we want to do. And so the whole kind of relationship with money is a difficult relationship. And that part of the relational work, part of the coming together, part of the being honest in the messiness together, also was around the money. We had to learn, and I'm not sure we completely learned. I think one of the real big lessons of this piece of work for me is that we would spend more time just talking about what money means to people before we go on to look at what to do with money. But the relational work was essential to making money something that we could talk about without competition. Because we had been so used to this kind of beggy relationship with money and funders. And part of the kind of beggy relationship with money and funders is that we were forced to compete against each other. I almost want to say who could beg the hardest, but that feels a little disingenuous. But it's that kind of thing. Let's go to the next slide.
Can I just jump in there,
yes,
Michael? Just to say, I mean, it's in this slide really, but that one of the things that we became aware of through the conversations with the group was that historically they had been positioned as competitors. And so their normal relationship with each other wasn't always one of collaborators. And but the way this has been structured, the way the system has been structured, it positions them against each other. So then for them to have conversations about who should get money when they have the power, when they had the power over that money, that was problematic. Candice and Adrian, I'll let you talk to that, either now or whenever. But that was one of the things that the money and that participatory grant making, which is what we're all here talking about, can, that it's a risk that we position people as who have historically been competitors, that without giving them the chance to build trust, that actually we risk damaging community relationships.
Why don't we
Candice?
I was just about to say, it impacts the relationship that we have with local partners. So what was really interesting about the group that came together, some of us knew each other already, some were new in this partnership space. And some of the local partners that I knew that came together in the safety group, we hadn't worked in this kind of non-competitive way. And it's actually helped us form a much better relationships. We have much more substance in how we are engaging after coming together after the safety groups. And I feel safe to have strategic conversations with my community partners now.
And so out of the work came, oh, here it is. Out of the work came 4 areas: Wakanda assets, and we're going to hear a bit more about that from Candice in a moment, and reimagining funding, which we're going to hear a bit more about from Adrian. But we also had a theme of work. I really like the phrase, we call it race equity in education, but I really like the word the Black Ofsted, a group of people who are going to interrogate education to look at where education is making Black children feel unsafe, and are going to pressure education to do something about those areas where Black children are feeling unsafe. And then there was the kind of theme of crime, justice, and policing that kind of came in and went out, and came in and went out, and came in and went out. And I think that we've kind of landed in a place where we think it's actually a much bigger piece of work that needs a revisit in some way to kind of do it justice. And we're looking at how we might revisit to do it some justice. But let's hear from
Before just sorry, Michael,
Mhm.
I keep doing this, but I suppose one of the things to just bear in mind on this slide is that we started off as a funder saying, how should we think about safety in our community?
Mhm.
And in all honesty, probably we thought that would end up with youth work, maybe some domestic violence, maybe, you know, but basically work that centered, I fear that might have centered violence. That maybe that when we think about safety, and certainly in the conversations I've had with colleagues and with other funders, you know, when we talk about safety, people immediately go to youth violence. That's the first thing that comes into people's heads, because we live in London and this is, you know, this is our lived reality. But when we brought this group of people together and talked about the systems that contribute to lack of safety, these are all people who, the community leaders that we're working with were youth workers and domestic violence workers, you know, these people who knew, you know, and family workers and people who really know what lack of safety is. But they wanted to you know, we peeled back to the point where these are the things that came through, and particularly those first three, which is where all the vast majority of the energy of the time went on. These are not what, as a funder, had we said, let's do some work about safety, I'm not sure, I'm almost certain we would not have come up with Wakanda assets. That actually we needed to build community wealth, or that we need to think about systemic inequalities in the education system. So just to say to funders that this process led us got us to a very different destination in terms of how the money is spent than it would have had a group, had we done it in a more traditional way. I'm going to stop.
Yeah, this kind of brings me in a point, what you've said, Radhika, to the idea of narratives. And one of the things I became really aware of as we did this work was, as a group of Black and racially minoritized people together, that actually one of the things that we had to do was to debunk the narratives of us. And because sometimes we respond, unless we're purposeful in not doing so, sometimes we respond to other people's narratives of us and other people's narratives of our need. And this also is why the long relational work, the long kind of debunking and rethinking ideas has to go on as a part of this, because people need to find themselves in a space where they start rewriting the narratives of themselves. That hang on, safety doesn't mean what the news at 10 is always telling me it means in my community. But actually, when I stop and think about it, I'm really interested in how my children's safe in education. How comes we don't own anything? How do we reimagine a kind of funding space where something different happens? And so when we are able to stop and think and reflect, we start rewriting narratives. And so this was not just about kind of making some decisions about where to fund, but it actually is about what is the narrative of my community as my experience, my professionalism, and my life has taught me, rather than what other people are possibly saying to me. Let me stop talking. Let's listen to Candice, who is going to tell us about her experience of being involved in this piece of work.
Thank you, Michael. I'm Candice James. I'm the director of Loughborough Community Centre. My practice lies within working with children and families. And being a part of this safety process has been really transformative, not only to my own self, but also for the work that I do here in the centre. I've been in this space for 15 years, and I was becoming quite cynical of the world around me. It was very much becoming a them and us. And I call this is my Max Roach bubble of where I'm based. And I was doing very well at keeping people out and not engaging because there was a lot of disappointment and also getting very resentful around not getting the resources that I needed here in this space to do my work well. There's many partnerships that have come about over my time here in our local area. I'm based in Lambeth. And I was starting to feel very unheard. I was feeling that my input into partnerships, I was having very little return. So small pieces of the pie was what we was getting when actually we were big contributors. And that was leading to a sense of feeling powerless. And I'm not that kind of person. I'm a very proactive person. I want to make a change. I like to think that my work is impactful. And being introduced to this concept, it allowed me to start to consider how we could possibly do things a different way. So I was curious about how I could work with community leaders and learn to do things differently. The introduction of the concept of safety was very new to me. It was refreshing. I've never heard how we can develop our community work together in order for a concept of safety. And we had to do a lot of work around what does this concept of safety mean. I've kind of landed, everyone has their own definitions, but I've kind of landed on it being a vision where everyone in the community can thrive and how we create mechanisms so we are on our way to the destination of safety for all. Being in this safety process, it was a series of safety labs, which included workshops and learning journeys. We started to explore key issues that we was facing within the group through a series of learning. And I was really inspired. I met so many different experts, but where I landed from going on, I think I did 3 learning journeys, is we are actually the experts. As community leaders doing this work, we know our community. We have expertise from our practice. And that was really validating. And for the first time, I felt a sense of being heard and feeling really, really powerful to be able to make a difference in a different way. If you ever come into my space, I'm always talking about safety here. And my team must have had enough of me, but it was about unlearning life to relearn how to do this work well in order to make a difference to the people that I work with in this space. And it started to become really, really meaningful. And I landed in the space of Wakanda owned assets, which is based around Black Panther, but the concept of Black ownership. And we've developed a prototype, which is looking at addressing systemic barriers to the safety of assets, but assets not just being buildings, but really seeing our assets as people. And the inspiration comes from hearing stories along the learning journey of groups and organizations who have lost their resource and their community buildings. I always was fearful that would we be the next community organization that would lose their community asset? Because without no asset, without no base, it's very hard to do community work. And we know that some of this loss has come from critical funding being withdrawn, and that we're having limited access to the expertise that allows us to resource our work and do our work well. There's a real need, what we saw within our learning journey, around community-led provision that's filling the gap for services that will enhance the work that we do in our Black communities. And the strategic intervention for the Wakanda-owned asset groups aims to build infrastructure, not only through practical support, but for a positive change. We're working with community leaders that we want to also come on this journey to be empowered and to think differently, to act differently, all to promote economic empowerment, social justice, and positive well-being for Black and racial minoritized communities.
Adrian. Adrian.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Candice. Okay, I've been a CEO for founder of Your Story for 21 years. And so is my screen frozen?
It is, but carry on because we
It
can't
is,
hear
but keep
you.
talking because you've got a nice face on.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm the CEO and founder for Your Story, working in mentoring children, young people, and working with their families. I've also been a magistrate for 18 years as well. And so during my time, I've seen the ramifications of how Black lives are impacted when systems may be broken or flawed. And so it's really important for me when we was invited that I was able to be in a room with our community partners who, as Candice said, that we know, and some of them didn't know, but it was really vital that we avoided the crabs in a barrel scenario where we was all trying to get the best for our own. And what allowed us to really build that trust was the time and the process of this social lab. And so we really had to let go of our egos and really had to look at what was going to change in the system for Black safety. What I think Candice talked about earlier is that there also is, for us as leaders, the community trusts us, we know what's needed, but we still feel that there's a lack of trust in funders because of how the funding system is set up. And so what we wanted to do was avoid having a scenario where analogy of a caged bird, and you've caged a bird for years who you love and you feel that it's beautiful and you show off to people and say it's a wonderful bird, and you open the door, you want them to be free, and they do not fly out the door. And if they do, they always come back. So what we wanted to do was develop a system which was really looking at the collective partnership of funders and also grant recipients. So to do this, what we did initially was scrap the word of funders and look more importantly to grant investors or community investors, because that's what you're doing. You're actually investing in the community. And also grant recipients would then be grant partners. And what we wanted to do was to reverse how we looked at grant funding. So to the funders in the room, you would put your money on the table as you do every year, and we understand your position on that. But we'll be looking at, over the past 5 years, what level of funding have you provided? What level of core funding have you provided for organizations? What's your level of Black representation on your boards and decision making? And then we'll have community partners, and we would look at how much funding that they've received over the past 5 years, what level of core funding they've received over the past 5 years, what is their level of representation of Black people on their boards. And then, because the pot of money is there, what we would do is community partners, we will look to see which funders we want to partner with. And we will make the decision on who we partner with based on your criteria of who you funded, core funding, Black representation, and so forth. And we will make that decision and we'll work with you. And we may ask for 30 grand from one of you, and 20 grand for another review. Okay. And then you guys would work with us on.
We've lost
Oh
him.
no, we lost him.
Yep.
Oh, we've lost him.
I guess let me just while we're waiting to come back. I mean, what that reimagining funding group are doing is really trying to radically transform and have got a plan and a process for how to flip this. And I know what Adrian was going to say at the end was if there are any funders that want to find out more. Obviously, he started to explain it, but we don't have time for all that detail here. For more detail here, but if anybody's curious to find out more, please, the emails will be available in the chat at some point. Please reach out, because this is a really exciting thing. And as a funder, this is not, when we started to talk about safety, we did not think we were going to end up here. But like for me, this is the exciting thing that you end up in. We've ended up in very different things, and this is a group of people who have really, they've got some time and some space to really develop this, but are looking for some funders to partner with.
There's a question that's come in, Radhika, and you or Candice can kind of give it a go. I might give it a go with myself as well. But what in this project on this occasion, we're working with Impact on Urban Health, and you had Black or minoritized people on your staff team. And they were able to kind of join in. What do you think an organization that might not have Black and minoritized people on its staff team who are able to devote time to this, what would it mean to a person that wasn't of color to be in this space? How do you think? Do you think that would work? Do you think that would not work? What would we need to think about differently if that were the situation? Either of you. Yeah.
I guess the important thing is that what we're trying to do is to center different voices and different experiences. So I think to come into it saying what we want to do is to create what we wanted to do was to create a context, a container, a mechanism for deep listening to perspectives that we don't have internally. So that's easier. And then how can we make sure that we're listening appropriately? There's a question in the chat also about internal work. That actually, as funders, as individuals, we're all swimming in systemic racism, right? Me too. We're all swimming in this water, and so we all need to do that work. And I think lots of us are on it. We're on this journey, and it's happening in all sorts of organizations. But really, to dig deep into that work, to understand our own biases and our own fears and anxieties about power and money and recognizing that racism is a thing. It's a construct that we are all swimming in. So I don't know how you would do it, but I suppose what I can say is that the intention certainly for us is to broaden the decision making to people who are not within it now and who have these other experiences. Candice?
Any thoughts, Candice?
I think my thoughts lie in, for me, it was about sitting or alongside working with a funder over a long period of time. I think when Impact were first introduced into this space, I was really thinking, why are they here? This is for us as community leaders. And I did feel a bit inferior of working alongside the funder, just thinking that they'd always do, or that they're just testing and experimenting upon us. Again, that them and us approach. So being able to work closely with Radhika and the team at Impact has definitely helped to stretch my thinking and my way of being around funders. I don't feel afraid. I can be my true, authentic self. And I think we formed a better relationship and understanding, because I see it as it's two-sprung. We've both been a part of this process, the funder and the community organization, and we've learned together. We've refined. So I think it could be positive.
I was in a meeting in another city actually recently, where we got to a point in the meeting where I thought the Black people in and minoritized people in the meeting needed to have a conversation before continuing the meeting, and just kind of dealing with that messiness, I think enabled us all to just kind of learn something, which is that even if we're in a process together, there might be times where the people with less power in that process might say, hey, let's have a bit of a timeout. Let's spend some time together in order that we could go back. And I think that that's part of just kind of dealing with the honesty of the messiness of the situation. That the more honest we can bring the messiness in, is the more genuine people can be. And as you say, the more we can just kind of be our authentic selves and to say the things that we need to say, regardless of who's in the room, and to hear the things that we need to hear, regardless of who's in the room. I just want to pick up. There are some questions in the chat that I'm being pointed to. There was one. I wouldn't even know how to begin to answer this one. This was the one about the kind of age group of the participants.
I jumped in,
Oh,
so
did you jump in?
I'm going to jump in, and I'm going to say probably there were 3 or 4 in their 20s and 30s. The majority were a bit older because we were selecting leaders. So we were looking for people, you know, the group that we're looking for, people who are experts and who are leaders of the community organizations. So that generally tends to having a bit more experience. So I'm going to say a few in their 20s and 30s, but mostly in their 40s and beyond. Next question.
And it's not to say that young people can't be leaders.
No,
young people can be leaders, but we have that within our own organizations, and they feed to us on what should be and what they see is happening for their peers.
Thank you, Adrian.
What would be the challenge, do you think, of kind of scaling this up? What do you think would be the challenge of scaling this up, or repeating it, or funding organizations taking it on?
For me, I'm thinking about facilitation. The facilitation by Ubele and Reos was remarkable. And I don't know how you replicate that facilitation, because it takes people who have been on this journey and can really understand the concept. How do you create the facilitators to be able to spread the process?
It's lucky that we've got 15 leaders who've already been through the process then, isn't it? Because that might be part of the answer, that you are all primed now to kind of learn some of the tools in order to kind of lead these processes yourselves.
Also, Michael, what I would add to that, I totally share in what Candice has said, is that you need a bit of a tough skin, and you need to be able to leave your ego aside, because as leaders over the years, we've had many rejections, we had many people who doubted us. And so to repeat the process, you need to really be able to trust the process. Trust the process that you're going to feel uncomfortable. You will not agree with certain aspects of viewpoints, and you've really got to work together, and you need the time. And it's really important that we had the time, and we weren't rushed into making decisions. And as Candy said, the facilitation was superb. So it brought us to, as Candy said, land in certain areas and certain decisions that we had to make. So yeah, anyone who wanted to take part, whether you're a funder with your community organization, you've got to have a tough skin, but you also be able to let your ego go and learn to trust the process.
Just a question for you, Adrian, while you're talking, which was how does the process, do you think the process dealt with intersectional kind of considerations? Because we're kind of talking as if Black people are a homogenous group and that we're all the same. And of course, we're not all the same. We're not homogenous. We come with all sorts of things. How do you think the process dealt with that?
It did and it didn't. And so we have to be honest in ourselves, and that when we were looking at Black safety, it's such a wide aspect. You've got gender, you've got sexuality, you've got religion, you've got affluence, you've got so many different things, you've got different cultures. And so it was difficult to bring in everything and to develop projects as a whole, or to look at systems as a whole. And so I feel that there's definitely work to be done in some of the areas of intersectionality that we didn't really grasp the nettle on. And those definitely would be, I would say, sexuality, and even looking at cultural differences within Black people. So you've got Black Portuguese, Black African. How do you describe that? It's such a it's so much, and so there's going to be, I'm sure, more social labs looking at those areas of need.
Intersectional areas, anything, Candice? Anything, Radik?
So I was going to add around the selected groups. There was a diverse range of groups who came together, leaders who came together within the space, and we covered different areas of work. But I was thinking about how everybody came in with their own perspective and intentions. We had to do a lot of work around refining the key areas together to whittle down, because there's so many issues in our community. So there was a lot of work around refining collaboratively, where do we land for this part of the project, which is actually, our investment pot was quite small. So we couldn't do everything. We had to refine together. And that took a lot of time, a lot of working with others' skills. And yeah, you can't cover everything. So it's about the people who you bring into the space and how they work together to decide what are going to be the key issues.
Just carrying on with the time thing, and we talked about money a bit earlier on, and somebody's kind of posed the question, how did we decide what to pay the community experts? And I was trying to remember how we decided, and I can't remember how we decided.
So we paid in two ways. People were resourced for the days they came to meetings, so that there was a reasonable day rate that they were paid for coming to the meetings. But actually, we also then made an investment into each of the organizations as a recognition that this expertise that we're now drawing on has been built by that organization. And so to reimburse the organization. And I think we just did that by picking a number out of the air, you and of what we could afford within the budget. Because the other thing is that we had a finite amount of money. We wanted to make sure there was enough money to spend at the end, because what's the point of this process if they don't get to spend some money and also spend? So it was a pragmatic thing. And we wanted to be as generous and pragmatic as it was. There was a question I wanted to answer that specifically for a funder, like the unequal power relations. So the question is, unequal power relations within funders as well. Absolutely, there are. And that funders, like the people on this call, are project managers, not board members or decision makers. So sometimes they get caught up in wanting the organization to move forward in particular ways, and actually the big decision makers don't. And how do we navigate that? And
can I answer that one?
Yeah, go.
Okay, so just in terms of that, and then looking at the sort of power dynamics in terms of the Reimagine funding group, and sorry, I lost connection, so sorry about that, everyone. But those are the vital points. So even within funders, we realize that the grant managers have more connection with organizations than their boards, and often the grant managers do know what the organizations are saying, and so what we wanted to do was have a level playing field, so organizations can integrate grant funders, your grant investors. We can interrogate you and we can say, actually, your people know what's happening and have you listened? And how we know that you have listened is how you've done your funding over the past 5 years. And so some of the smaller grant funders, investors, you'll go to the top of the list, because we will be able to see often the smaller grant funders listen more closely to organizations. And so we would have the chance to choose you first and then choose another, maybe larger organization funder to work with. And so it's really important that even as funders, you listen to your people on the ground, just as much as you listen to organizations on the ground.
We've just got 2 minutes to end, and it feels important that we end on time. And any thoughts that anybody would like to leave?
I would like to say that there have been several questions about the methodology, you know, the social labs process. So we ran a session on that last week. There's a report, there's a recording. We can talk, you know, so please ask and we will share. But also we commissioned Ubele and Reos to do this piece of work. So I'm going to say, as the funder in the room, I'm going to say, if anybody wants to work with really amazing facilitators,
I'm shaking my arms. I don't think that's right. Say it again now,
and so we are, you know, we have this talent in the ecosystem, and we will all get better at it by doing it more. And there was also a question about impact. Anne from Newham. The question about impact, the impact for this is going to be hard to show immediately because this is a process and they're now doing prototypes. But I think the impact that I can directly say is the impact it's made on the organizations, which you heard, and also the impact it's made on the types of interventions we're making, that we're making very different interventions, that the kinds of money that where the money is going, the interventions we've made all these years are not making enough difference. Inequality exists. We're not making enough difference. So my hypothesis is that by intervening in the ways that communities want, maybe we'll be intervening in completely different ways, and maybe that's going to give us the impact, but no direct impact for you yet.
Thank you very much, Radhika. Anything from anybody else? We've hit 11 o'clock. Please, if anybody wants to get in contact, I think our email addresses have been put in the chat. Please get the report, download the report. I think the link's going to be put in the chat. And I look forward to kind of hearing from people and answering your questions and finding ways of continuing this really important conversation. Thanks very much, Candice. Thanks very much, Adrian. Thanks very much, Radhika. And thanks very much, Yannick, who we need to wave to because he's sick and I'm sure he's watching. And thanks very much, everybody. We'll see everybody.
Thank you to everybody for joining and for this really interesting conversation. Let's continue doing it.
Bye.
There's a link to the team.